Officially, we have a new record. Over $17 million raised on Kickstarter by a card game. Are we witnessing the birth of a brand new powerhouse in the TCG world? Or are we at the absolute peak of the FOMO bubble we can imagine? Today, we'll be talking about the Cyberpunk TCG and its massive Kickstarter project. We'll try to do a deep dive into this product to see what to expect, what history teaches us, and what the strengths and potential risks of this project are. And at the end, you won't get a recommendation exactly, but you will find out what I plan to do with this card game, and whether the boxes will also be available at CardHorizon. Alright, as I've already mentioned, it's about the Cyberpunk card game, published by a relative newcomer, as far as I know, WeirdCo. This is a company that's been linked to Marvel Snap, but for card products, they haven't released a project as big as Cyberpunk TCG yet, and based on the Kickstarter size, it looks like it'll be a massive project. And it's going to target a lot of markets. The core market will be Europe, but also the United States, South America, and even Australia. If you check out social media, you'll see that the interest in this card game is very high. And it's not really surprising. Cards are really trending right now. People are mostly talking about them because of availability issues, especially with Pokemon, but many card games have also started slowly entering the mainstream. Magic and Pokemon aren't just niche hobbies like they used to be. They're becoming a more popular form of entertainment among millennials, and often their kids too. More and more shops are opening up, and more of them want to trade these cards. Issues related to high-end speculation are popping up, obviously. The whole thing with the card Logan Paul sold, all the controversies, big players like Kevin O'Leary entering the market, and sports cards in the background that already have a stable and high value. Looking at all these factors, it's no wonder there's so much hype surrounding the Cyberpunk release. But the question is, who actually paid those $17 million? Was it people who jump on every card game that comes out? Or was it speculators hoping that items from those first pledges, different size booster boxes, metal cards, numbered cards, graded cards, although how they plan to grade and ship them is another story. Maybe it was people who are genuinely interested in this card game. Those are exactly the kind of people needed for a card game to stand the test of time and become something that brings the community together, while giving the producer the chance to consistently release new cards and keep the fire burning in this hobby for many, many years, and of course, rake in the big bucks, because after all, there isn't much charity work going on among card producers and publishers. It's a business like any other, but for a business like that to work, history teaches us that a card game needs real fans. Players or collectors, there have to be people who will keep the fire of this card game alive, because games won't really make a big splash or achieve great success on speculators alone. So going back to my question, who spent those $17 million? In my opinion, all of the groups we mentioned. There's definitely a ton of speculators, a ton of people with FOMO, flippers, scalpers, players, enthusiasts, big Cyberpunk fans. They're probably all there, but only once the game is out. Once people buy the boxes, open them, and start playing, we'll see which group actually wins out in the long run, and how interest will be sustained through things like in-store play, collector activity, discussion forums, and so on. But there's another thing. For this card game to stand the test of time, it's not just the players and enthusiasts who are important. Star Wars fans have probably learned that the hard way in recent years. You also need good execution from the company that publishes and distributes the card game. And for WeirdCo, as we discussed, this will be their debut. And here we can already add the first item to the list of risks: how this product will be physically available and distributed. And it's not just about availability issues, like with Pokemon right now. In fact, it could be the opposite. We're talking here about problems related to an oversupply of the product. Look at Star Wars. They basically printed the market to death, and that's exactly the risk here, that ultimately results in a stagnant, unattractive product that stores don't want to trade in. And if stores don't want to trade, the product doesn't reach players, tournaments aren't organized, and the card game falls apart. This will be an important test for Cyberpunk, and definitely something worth watching closely. But what's so special about this card game itself? And what could turn out to be its strengths and weaknesses after launch? I've already mentioned some, so let's focus on another possible downside. Generally, the moment when Cyberpunk is going to launch is good, but also difficult at the same time. Because the hype for cards is currently very high, because with these card games, especially new ones, we had the massive release of Riftbound last year, this year Naruto's coming out, and last year we also had Gundam. There are many more of these titles than there used to be, and Cyberpunk is appearing as another title that will have to define its identity. How is it going to define that identity? Well, let's see what it can build that on. First of all, unique gameplay. As for Cyberpunk's gameplay, we really have to wait for those. Those pre-release tournaments, the meta that will form there, we'll see how the archetypes look, the division, and so on. The mechanics themselves are unique, you could say that. It also uses dice, which RPG players probably have at home with any problem. Do all Cyberpunk players? I don't know, but I don't think the availability of these physical accessories would be a big problem. Unique gameplay is a big risk, but also a great opportunity if it turns out that the game is really good. We still have to wait for that. Another thing that can definitely help with the identity of this brand is also the giant intellectual property. Cyberpunk is not just a game, a very good game, released by CD Projekt, which of course also has a stake. In the case of Cyberpunk TCG, although, as I mentioned before, the official publisher is different. Besides that, there is also a huge lore universe, you could say. Aesthetic, books with cyberpunk lore, and more films and shows that have appeared. While generally in pop culture, this aesthetic is already something unique, in a world where most card games, except for Pokemon of course, are heading towards something like medieval fantasy with various twists. Cyberpunk will be unique in this regard. But is the uniqueness of the intellectual property, the mechanics of these cards, and the distribution enough to ensure success? Well, no. And proof of this could be, for example, Altered, which is a card game whose funeral may coincide with the birth of Cyberpunk, which is very ironic in itself and says a lot about this card game market. Altered was also a huge game funded on Kickstarter with a lot of hype at the beginning. Altered TCG specifically tried to ride a different trend. I mean, Cyberpunk tries to use the hype and FOMO around cards, while Altered TCG, in my opinion, tried to use hype and interest in things like cryptocurrencies and NFTs. Those were very popular topics back then. So these cards, which didn't really have value centered around physical cards, but were only redeemable in the digital world, were certainly a very unique model. But as history shows, it didn't quite stand the test of time. We have to give credit where credit is due, though, and say that Altered had a very strange way of distribution too, and there were a lot of problematic things with that game. Although, for example, when it comes to the style of the artwork, the artists, and the aesthetics of these cards, well, in my opinion, and probably in the opinion of many people in this hobby, Altered passed the test. But that wasn't enough. Will these things be enough for Cyberpunk? Well, we'll really have to see. And now I'll share my opinion with you on how I see Cyberpunk, and whether I'm incredibly hyped for it, or maybe I won't even touch it with a 10-foot pole. My opinion is somewhere in the middle. I'm not as big an enthusiast for the Cyberpunk release as I was for the Riftbound release in the fall of 2025. Mainly because when it comes to Riftbound, I had a lot of information about the gameplay. I had the chance to play quite a few games, and from the very beginning, I knew that this sort of slightly simplified magic, but less trivial and less naive than Hearthstone, could be the sweet spot that players might really enjoy. Plus, I knew that League of Legends has a very large fan base who like to jump even between conceptually slightly different things. Meaning LoL players who jumped to teamfight tactics and found their place there, and who loved and promoted Arcane on Netflix. And Riftbound has also been an absolute banger of a release so far. Sure, there are bugs and the card wording is terrible. Riftbound will catch up on these issues in my opinion. It's not guaranteed to be a huge title, of course, but in my opinion, it looked much stronger before release than Cyberpunk does now. But as for me personally, I have to admit there's a bit of a collector in me, and honestly, a bit of a speculator as well. Someone who really knows that when it comes to card game releases that ultimately stand the test of time, well, they can be a pretty good opportunity. Sometimes you just get that feeling, that this is something special, something worth holding on to. to have things in that collection that you won't be able to buy secondhand later. And no, I'm not saying here, of course, that alpha boxes, Cyberpunk alpha boxes, will one day be worth as much as boxes of Magic beta. No, I think that ship has sailed. And Cyberpunk probably won't be that kind of title either, but in my opinion, it doesn't have to be at all. And if we're looking for better comparisons as a sort of benchmark for what Cyberpunk could become, then I would direct your attention toward a card game that we don't really talk much about here, which is Flesh and Blood. Flesh and Blood appeared as a card game with relatively moderate hype, but healthy interest, especially from players who didn't like various things in Magic, who were looking for something for themselves, looking for a slightly different aesthetic, and who weren't satisfied with the competitive scene in Magic. Flesh and Blood offered that kind of alternative. It had its ups and downs, but it held on, survived those few years, and now, welcome to Wrath First Edition boxes, which had an MSRP of $80, are already worth over $2,000. And it's only been a few years, so is the game worth the candle? This isn't investment advice, but personally, I'll dabble in some speculation and put a few boxes in my closet. Because even if this card game ultimately turns out to be a flop, and I'm not at all convinced that it will be, because the factors I mentioned give this game a real chance to find its niche, even if this card game failed, those who have been in this card and collector world for many years, who bought cards before bans, bought cards of games that were ending, and bought boxes before reprints, know that it's not the end of the world. I've definitely spent money on card speculation that was worse, and I probably won't have any regrets, whatever happens. But like I said, the upside is huge. If, after analyzing this information, you think you want to give Cyberpunk a chance, get to know the game, or maybe put it in your closet as a collector, then CardHorizon will also be selling these boxes. And for more information, I invite you to check out the links below. Take care.